this episode, we have Paul Cohen, I Spy, private investigator to the stars. Well, hello, everybody. This is Susan Stafford with Out of the Box. And you're going to be amazed who I have today. You know, we always have surprises. Well, today's a friend. But more than a friend, he's one of the best private investigators you're ever going to meet in your entire life. And I met him. Paul Cohen is his name. Hello, Paul.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for the compliment.
Oh, it's true, though. It's true. We met each other when you were investigating the Rock Hudson case.
Correct.
And boy, was that the beginning of the beginning.
I was brought in as a replacement investigator for the trial. They had a claim presented to the estate, and it was interesting because it was presented under a homeowner's claim. And because of that, and because of my background, they brought me in to prepare for the trial. So I was brought in probably 8 months before the trial, and I stayed on until this date.
And how long did that take?
I mean, how long was the trial?
How long was it from when you came on to when you were finished?
Well, it still continues almost to this date because there are issues that arise even now that I get contacted from various individuals connected to the estate. And because of my files and what I retain, I can provide that information. Coincidentally, I am the only living person that has access to the probate file of Rock Hudson alive today.
You're the only living person. Say that again.
I'm sorry?
You just said you're the only living person.
I mean, when the trial was about to begin, the judge signed an order allowing certain individuals to access the probate file. I was one of 2 or 3 individuals. I'm the only remaining living individual that can access that file now.
Yes, you're walking around with a lot of information. Now I'm going to back up to go forward. Rock Hudson, who was a movie star for many people, they remember he was a movie star. He was an icon. He went to the Navy in 1948, came back, and got a wonderful start in Hollywood. Women loved him. He did Doris Day films. Oh, my goodness, the man did not stop. He was a symbol. Women had no idea that he was gay. Few people knew that he was gay because Rock, whose real name was Roy Fitzgerald Sharing, he felt that if he told the truth, they wouldn't want him anymore. Is that your thinking?
He was a very private individual.
Yes. And of course, the gay people felt like, well, if you don't come out and say you're gay, then you're not one of us. So his manager, Henry Wilson, forced a marriage with his then secretary, Phyllis, and they got married. It was miserable, of course, but they did it for the tabloids. They did it for the career. And
career in the public, yes.
Right. And when that was broken up and he started dating guys again and everything, and needless to say, people really did love Rock because he was a lovable human character. They had 2 gentlemen up there. They had Mark Miller, George Nader, and Tom Clark, who was one time his lover. And they're staying at what we called the Castle. And when he got AIDS, everybody disappeared. I'm not exaggerating. We had 4 people that would come up to the house. And that was Pat Boone and Shirley. And that was Terry Sweeney and Gavin McLeod. And the rest, the fear was unbelievable. Unbelievable.
From my understanding, and I'm backtracking now because I got involved after his death.
Right.
It was my understanding that when this happened and he came out, a lot of people did not understand what this disease is. Mm-hmm. And they thought that they could catch it by merely shaking a person's hand. As it turned out, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But because of fear, the public avoided it.
Well, the fear same fear that we have with COVID-19 today. Nobody knows how it starts, why it starts, how it spreads. It's that same kind of fear. And although we weren't wearing a mask in those days, nobody was going into the house. In fact, when we went to call a funeral parlor to pick them up, we couldn't get someone to come because they were scared to pick them up. Now, segue. I've given a little background about Rock, who was a friend, and a love movie star. I mean, from Send Me No Flowers to, he did 48 movies. So we've covered that. What we're going to cover with you is what no one else has. And that's the private investigation that you did and what you earned by, I would say, as a hound dog. You wouldn't let things go. Now, where should we start? Should we start in the court, or should we start with each lie that the court never allowed us to present? Where would you like to start?
With the trial, it was an unusual trial. The case was actually directed and pulled to a specific judge for a specific reason. This judge that heard the case wanted to hear the case. He was the presiding judge. He should have assigned it out, but for whatever personal reasons, he wanted to hear this case. So he had a bias going in, and we knew that. We were there to defend the estate in the best way we could, so the attorneys made a decision on how to proceed. And then they turned me loose. And they gave me a list of individuals, including yourself, and that's how I called you up, and I was a little bit forceful with you in the beginning, and I apologize for that. But I needed to tell you who I was, who I represented, and what I needed. And you were most kind and were helpful in directing me where I needed to go.
I know you have practiced and investigated the I Spy Los Angeles.
I Spy in LA, yes.
I mean, you have tons of cases, which, by the way, for you that are listening, we'll be doing in so many different cases with Paul. He'll be a regular on this. But today we're talking about Rock Hudson, and we're going to talk about the trial and how you saved the estate, basically. Yeah. So let's pick up with the trial.
Okay, I was brought in, as I said, for the purposes of preparing the trial. Because of my background and the fact that I have a JD behind my name, I understand some of the complexities in the evidentiary law that's needed and the facts surrounding that will either allow evidence to be admitted or denied. I also understand the motivations of witnesses, why they come forward or don't want to come forward. That's very frustrating, especially when you're dealing in a trial of this magnitude. There were a lot of people that were connected to this situation. There was a lot of allegations that were made that were never proven, but some of the major prominent allegations of Mark Christian's behavior and his contacts with individuals were an issue. And this judge did not want to allow some of that to come in.
And let's clarify for people that are just coming in with out of the box here with Dr. Susan Stafford and Paul Cohen. When he speaks about the man, Mark Christian, he's talking about the man that was in court suing Rock Hudson and the rest of us. So we want to explain that, just in case they don't know.
Well, Mark Christian, his real name was Mark McGinnis. He used Mark Christian as a stage name. He was a wannabe actor, also gay, who wanted to proceed in life and get forward, not by his own talents or abilities, but by who he could be connected to. He hooked up with some very prominent individuals who their names are not important right now, but one of them was an introduction to Rock Hudson. And Rock was he was drawn to Christian because of allegedly Christian's looks, and they met They formed a relationship, and Mark Christians profited on that relationship in many different ways. One of which was that he decided to move into the castle, or Rock Hudson's home, which he did. And once that happened, then the problems arose because you had Mark Miller and George Nader, who were basically there and were running the estate, were concerned about some of the activities that were going on there. There was the butler, the gardener, Mark Flatterly, a whole bunch of individuals who all saw what was happening at the estate and knew that Rock was being taken advantage of.
And at this point, I'd like to mention that James, who was the butler, ended up, after Rock's passing, going to work for Frank Sinatra in Palm Beach. I don't know where the gardener went. He was such a good gardener. Where did he go? Do you know?
I think he's now passed on, but I've interviewed him at length. And when you categorize him as a gardener, everybody took whatever position they had to take. So there were times that Mark Miller ran the place, but there were other times that he would clean up messes around the house. So he was a man of all trades. And again, like Dobbs, there were times that he would do administrative tasks as opposed to cleaning up. And there were some aspects of some behavior that Christian had with some of his companions that he brought up there that Mr. Dobbs wouldn't even do. He refused to do.
Well, do you think that because Mark was, because this is us talking and we don't have to worry about a judge saying we can't talk, which is what they told me in court, do you think that Mark had Rock on the mind when he went after Rock because of the script that was written before this all happened?
Are you talking about the script Between a Rock and a Hard Place?
I am.
Yeah. All right. Let me give you a little background on that. During the course of my investigation, there was a woman, Liberty Martin, who changed her name to Martin, Martin. She was hooked up with Mark McGinnis, a.k.a. Mark Christian, and they wrote a script together. They registered the script with the Writers Guild. This is a common knowledge. This script was about a gay second-rate actor who found it necessary to hook up with an A-listing actor and then threatened to expose that actor if he was not given certain considerations for not going to the National Enquirer. And that script was discovered before the trial, and it was not allowed to be admitted into the trial. This is a roadmap to what happened, literally a roadmap. And it was frustrating because you could see everything outlined, and Mark Christian did everything that was in that script. It was written before this whole thing took place, and yet it was never addressed.
And let me ask you, because you're smart, and I have to ask you, why was that script not allowed into the courtroom?
I believe, if I remember, and again, it's 30-some years ago, I believe there was a closed hearing, and there was a dispute made or an objection made by Harold Roden, who was Mark Christian's attorney. And for whatever reason, I was not privy to that meeting. The script was never admitted into evidence.
It would have made such a difference to know that I have written a script to take Rock Hudson as a lover and blackmail him, which is in the script. That would have been so, but they didn't take it. They didn't allow it.
Theoretically, yes. However, this was a very interesting trial. When it was over, the jurors had literally packed up and were ready to go home literally within 15, 20 minutes of being given the case. They had clearly made up their mind well before they went into deliberations what their verdict was. And at that time, the thoughts of the general public were that if you had a communicable disease, in this case AIDS, you owed it an obligation to your partner to disclose this. And that is absolutely true. But that is not what happened. So the court was, in my opinion, biased. The jury wanted to send a clear message, and they did, that any individual that had a communicable disease owed an obligation to tell their partner about it or be held to the consequences. And the jury did what was right.
Absolutely. And had Rock gone to bed with Mark Christian, he would have been absolutely on target for being one of those people. He never went to bed with him.
Well, that's the thing. I believe there was a relationship between Rock Hudson and Christian at one time.
Oh, I do too. Too.
But it ended well before Rock became contagious. So after he became contagious, Mark Christian was still in the picture because he physically was at the castle or the residence, but he had no physical relationship with Rock Hudson. In fact, the Mark Miller, George Nader, the staff there were so concerned about what was going on, they isolated Mark Christian to the theater. And they blocked off the access from the theater to the main house, which had the bathrooms. So if Christian had to go to use the restroom, he would have to go outside and then back in. And they thought in their own mind that that would be sufficient enough to deter Christian and make him leave. But he was dead set on staying.
Right.
It was a free ride for him.
I remember, and I'm going to go over just what you said. Let's just say this is the bedroom here, and we're making sure that any entrance to that bedroom is locked, is barred.
Yeah.
And then downstairs, out of the house, was a little theater that we all used to perform and watch movies, etc. That's where he was put. Mark Christian was put there to keep him away from Rock, because Rock's heart was breaking with this untruth, because Rock would, frankly, never go to bed with somebody who had AIDS. It'd be very difficult anyway, as you know, from seeing so much of what AIDS does to the body.
Yes.
So I only defend him because you'll go on and tell me more truths, but I also defend him because I saw Rock, and there's no way Rock was going to bed with anyone.
No, he was incapable of it.
Right.
At times he was incoherent, and people were assisting him the best way they could, but unfortunately his mind was fading.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, when they had in the court cases all these different hotels that they had gone to, it's my understanding that the hound dog, that's you.
I remember that point very distinctly because it was frustrating because it was summer. We were told that Christian's testimony under oath was that Rock Hudson and he went to a number of different hotels from Hollywood all the way up to Santa Barbara and named quite a few of them. And that Rock would go in using his own name, charging the room to his American Express Mammoth Films credit card, and staying the night and having relationships with Christian. I requested immediately the Mammoth credit card bills and statements, none of which ever showed any hotel bills like that. And I must have checked out, and I'm not joking, over 100 hotels from Hollywood to Santa Barbara were indicated. None of them could confirm that they ever saw Rock Hudson, let alone Mark Christian.
And you went to each one of them?
Each one of them. And it was it was very hot. And it was very frustrating because I remember my air conditioning in my car wasn't working properly. And it was frustrating to go on around all day without air conditioning.
How long did you work on that? On that, that segment?
On the Hudson case, I worked all the way through the trial. And then after the trial, we had an individual who I had contacted by the name of Gunther Frolov. And he was one of the witnesses that was brought up during testimony who allegedly had a sexual relationship with Christian during the time that Christian testified that he was celibate. and he did not have any sex with anybody but Rock Hudson. Now, Gunther did not want to talk to me during the trial, and immediately after the trial, it was submitted to the jury. That was about 11 o'clock in the morning. The jury came back about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the verdict came in at $22-some million, which is quite a bit of money. I got a call that afternoon from Gunther, who said that he was very upset over what had happened. He just heard about the verdict, and if I would come down to Dana Point to meet him, he wanted to show me something, and I got authority to do that. I went down there. I was trying to find out what he was talking about, but he said, "You'll understand when I get there." So I go down there, and he says, I didn't want to get involved, but this is an injustice that needed to be cured. He explained that the reason he didn't come forward is because he didn't want to be involved in such a high-profile trial. However, because of the verdict, he now wants to make the story correct. He said that during the time that Christian said that he was celibate, he had in fact had sex with Mark Christian. I said, "Well, thanks for nothing. How are we going to prove this?" And he went in the other room. He produced a videotape, and on the videotape was a encounter with Mark Christian.
He had a videotape of their having sex?
Yeah. And there was a news show on the TV with the date of it.
Just a minute. This is the man that's accusing Rock of AIDS. He doesn't know if he has AIDS and he's going to bed with someone else.
Yes. And he had testified that he was celibate. He had not sex with anybody but Rock. And this went directly to his credibility. His testimony, he perjured himself. We got all the information. We got what we could admit into evidence, and it was submitted for what's called a remitter at the trial judge. The judge looked at it and said the jury award was excessive, not called for, and reduced the judgment down to about $5 million, a little over $5 million. Then there was a negotiated settlement because Harold Roden and Marvin Mitchelson got into a fee dispute. They were both the attorneys for Mark Christian, and Mitchelson couldn't do the trial because he had been indicted for tax evasion. So it was Harold Roden. So they were fighting over the fees, but ultimately the judgment was reduced to about $1.5 million. And that's how it got interesting, because you at one point yourself, in order to try to mitigate what was going on, had approached Mark Christian with an offer that would have made him far more wealthy than this judgment would have.
Yes, I was given permission from the Rock Hudson estate to talk to Mark Christian. Thank you. And I went to a little restaurant and asked him if he would settle for, I think it was $50,000 a month the rest of his life.
Correct.
And he refused that offer. I had a glass of wine there, and that was the same day, October the 2nd, that Rock died. And so he ran up to Rock's, put on different uniforms, outfits, so he could parade in different clothes and get different shots. A little disturbed.
You're talking about right after he passed away.
Right after he passed away.
In fact, let me mention something I thought was very important. When the news of Rock's passing occurred, the very first phone call that was made from the estate was a phone call from the estate to Marvin Mitchelson's office.
Right.
Mark Christian advising him of the problem. It's noted on the video footage that Christian was giving interviews, and with each interview, he would change clothes.
That's true.
This was a publicity stunt for him.
That's true. That's exactly. Thank you for putting it proper.
And you were right there, so you were there. You know.
I was shocked. I continue to be shocked. I always think nothing else is going to shock me. But the thing that got me the most was anybody that knew Rock knew that he would not intentionally go to bed with somebody to murder them, because that's what it would be, murder. And because we loved Rock, and because this kid came around and wanted it all, and you stopped that. You alone stopped that because you would not give up. And that's why we'll take a break here. This is Susan Stafford, out of the box with no other than I Spy Los Angeles, Paul Cohen. This is what's interesting, Paul. Rock Hudson is one of many stories. We're going to do a story on Casey Kasem, but would you just mention a few other things, not celebrities, but things that we're going to do on the show that's going to help people, such as?
Well, let me say this and prefix it a little bit. I've been doing this for many, many years. In fact, more decades than my wife will allow me to tell you. I have handled what's called excess policy cases. Normally, when a person has one level insurance, you can buy what's called an umbrella policy. And because of my background, I would be brought in because of these umbrella policies, or the claim was worth more than the underlying policy. So I got involved in some pretty heavy cases. They range from protecting religious and political leaders from sexual abuse claims, elder abuse claims, child abuse claims, wrongful cremations, a lot of morticial cemetery claims. Example, they want to see the remains of your loved one, and you open up the resting place, the box, and you're expecting to see your mom in there, and you see an African American man in there. That has a tendency to get you upset. I've handled everything from the common slip and falls to having to produce dead men to testify at trial. Done that several times.
Well, I think when we were talking about, Chris, I know you, so I know what all you do. And this show's about people who make a difference, and you have made a difference. Some people are just hound dogs, and then there are other people that are honest hound dogs who make a difference. And I never saw you give up. Now, the reason I mention this is because even though we'll be talking about maybe once a week you'll come on, or once every 2 weeks, you tell people how they can get their claims, if they have claims that are sitting someplace and they don't.
I'll give you a perfect example of what you're talking about.
Okay.
When I first started out, and this was again a long time ago, I had a simple slip and fall with a fairly alleged serious injury at a restaurant in Canoga Park. And I did the claim, we paid the claim, and this was back 77, 78, and we paid out $150,000, $200,000, which is a lot of money at that time. And I, as I told you, I'm a pack rat. I don't throw my files away. So about 15 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I got a claim in of another slip and fall at a restaurant in Canoga Park. And the address seemed to be familiar. The name of the restaurant was not. I go over to the restaurant, and sure enough, it's the same location, which was not unusual, except the claimant's name was the same. She had gone back almost 25 years later and made the same slip and fall at the same restaurant, but a different name on the restaurant.
No.
Yeah. I submitted it at the Department of Insurance, and I couldn't get arrested by them. It wasn't big enough.
Well, these are the things.
Very frustrating.
I mean, frustrating, and also seems impossible. And so we're going to be talking about that. I have a whole list of things we can talk about, but things that you can talk about that will help people, that they can look after and see if they want.
There's certain common denominators among everything that you do. Simple means of protecting yourself. Document who you are. Check your credit every year and make sure that you're not a subject of identity theft. That is very common right now. Give me 15 minutes and I can find out any information on anybody. And that's scary to me because it shouldn't be that way.
Well, when you know somebody and you can trust that person, that's why you get the phone calls. Because I frankly wouldn't know. We had people that were tracking a few years ago. You helped me. Um, we just were trying to help people get out of occults, and you helped me. And so that's my relationship with Paul, because he's there and he helps me, and he knows. And so swing back here. I got you off topic here on Rock. I think a lot of people told you to give up on this case.
Sorry?
A lot of people might have said to you, give up on this case.
It's not my nature. I've always been a pit bull. Once I bite, I don't let up until I get the answer.
I mean, the fact that Mark was lying and he was set up, we couldn't bring in the script that he'd written under his real name, Mark McGinnis. So he'd already set Rock up. We'd all met. I had met Mark McGinnis long before I met you. A sweet, blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy, but unfortunately not very sane. He wanted it all, and he went for the big guy, and Rock fell for him. And yes, Rock was gay.
Rock was a good person, but and I'm not. There's no buts, but he was a good person. He had far more positive traits than he had negative traits. The only thing, and I'm going from not knowing him, but studying him, is that he was a little bit subject to self-indulgence. He was a A-level star. He had that aura about him, and he was sort of self-indulgent in that way. And he did not look at having a sexual fling with somebody as being something harmful. He just looked at it as a pleasurable event in his life. So he didn't look at it with the same perspective that we look at it in retrospect.
No, and I remember asking Rock when I was up at his home, why are you gay? You know, because they never kissed in front of me. They were always very respectful. And I'd go to a party. I took my sister Catherine once, and leave Ullman be there, and Elizabeth Taylor, about 4 women. And they were respectful. They were having fun. They were, you know, the hardest thing as a Christian that I had to get over is that judgment is no worse than any other judgment. That we love them because when God died, he said for everybody. He didn't say for some. He said everybody. And there's the hitch, because then I have to learn to love the people that he loves. And that's hard to do all the time.
It is. And he should not be judged by a single event in his life, i.e. the trial. Because that wasn't Rock Hudson.
Right.
You have to look at his entire life, what he did for others, the enjoyment that he gave to others, the uncounted acts of generosity that he gave. He loaned people money, friends of his money, knowing he would never get the money back. Because, and I remember one incident, and the name is not important, but he loaned $12,000 to one of his employees so his mother could get some surgery that she needed.
That's right.
Knowing that he would never get that money back.
No, Rock did that repeatedly, and people who knew Rock knew. I mean, at the foot of Rock's home was George Papard, and if you drive a little further, you have Jay Bernstein, who managed Farrah Fawcett. If you drive a little further, you had, trying to think of the star's name, but it was Star Row, and everybody kind of knew everybody's business, but nobody ran over for coffee. You know what I mean? But I remember Rock gave an enormous money to Motion Picture Home. He gave a lot of money, enormous, to the Braille Institute.
Those were the 2 main beneficiaries of his will.
Yes, and that was quite a bit of money that went to both of them.
Yes, I actually have a copy of his will.
Do you?
And we're talking 7 figures.
Yeah, and there was one more, but I can't remember it, Paul.
Braille Institute, Woodland Hills Actors Home, and scholarships for med students at UCLA.
That's it. You know, so we can honestly talk about Rock, and and his being a wonderful man.
The scholarships that he set up at UCLA were done anonymously.
Wonder why?
The scholarship. He didn't want to be given credit for giving money. He just wanted people to become doctors.
Well, reacting on that, when he was in France being checked for AIDS, Mark Miller had paid for the plane, you might remember, because they didn't want to give anybody anything. So they had to fly privately, and it was quite a cost. Mm-hmm. And when he was over there, and Mark said, everyone says you have AIDS. And he said, and I got the press out there, and I don't know what to do. And Rock said, well, if I have AIDS, then let's put it out there so everybody can know and start working on the fact that if I have it, someone else could have it. He took it straight on. He didn't try to hide it.
Well, he did. And in fact, to give you an example, when he first came out and he were trying to raise money for AIDS research, he couldn't get arrested. But he called a friend of his who happened to be named Reagan, Mrs. Reagan, and told her what was going on. And the next day they had a $200,000 donation by the Reagan Foundation for AIDS research. And then he also went to Elizabeth Taylor. And Elizabeth Taylor agreed to be a spokesman at that time and was instrumental in helping things out there.
Well, two things. One, the fear of it. I have to go back to the fear of it when he did the show with Linda Evans. Yeah. And then they showed how emaciated he was the day after. And he was. It was taking him down fast.
He was very concerned about that. One of the things I had to do an investigation, and this was one of the more enjoyable portions of the trial, is I had an opportunity to sit down with Linda Evans many years ago and interview her about what happened.
I'm sorry you had to suffer that way.
Oh, yeah. Hard to suffer like that. I wish it could have been a couple more hours.
She's a dear. She's a friend.
She had a relationship. She knew Rock for many, many years. And when they had the onstage kiss, she was sort of surprised that it was called a stage kiss, not a open mouth kiss, a French kiss. She thought nothing of it. And she didn't ask about it, but she made a mental note of it. Rock was so concerned about it, he contacted Dr. Gottlieb, who was his doctor at that time, and asked if it could be transmitted. And when I found out about that, I called Dr. Gottlieb, and Dr. Gottlieb informed me that he asked about that before the kiss, so we would make sure he could protect Linda without infecting her. And that's the kind of person he was.
Yes, and we did send her a dozen roses afterwards from Rock, and she was fine. There was no problem. She's a lady. But I will tell you a story about Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor came up to see, as I said, Gavin MacLeod, Terry Sweeney, Pat and Shirley Boone were the only people up there besides Carol, the nurse, and the people that were in the house, Tom Clark, George Nader, and
the nurses that were taking care of her, Mrs. New.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Elizabeth Taylor comes in, and Rock's in the center of the bed, very emaciated. And she takes off her shoes. She climbs in the bed. She puts her arms around him and starts rocking him. That was Elizabeth Taylor.
And she had no idea of if she could contract the virus.
That's right.
Doing that. I give her credit for that.
And I always have to put that in there because just imagine. And then when she was finished, she touched him on the head and we said goodbye to each other. And that's when, of course, Rock turned out interesting to be a Roman Catholic, because I said to him, I knew Shirley and Pat had been there, so I knew the job was done, as we say, because if they're there, there's going to be glory. But I did say, how were you raised? I mean, finally, well, actually, I asked him, what would you do if you could change your life? What would you do? And he said, I would have always had one bathroom. That's what he said. And I said, oh, Rock, come on. Well, how were you raised? And he said, a Roman Catholic. And I said, would you want a priest? And he said, yes. And that's how we got, as you know.
Terry did it, I think.
Former Jesuit Terry Sweeney, who came over. Right. And he accepted Christ in his life. Well, I don't know if a lot of people know that, but that is a true story.
No, Amen. That is a true story. I verified that in a number of ways.
Yeah. And so that was like wonderful.
And, I should mention, too, at this point, one of the contentions in the trial was that Mark Christian was constantly present during all of these events.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. And that's what he testified to, but we couldn't find confirmation of that. He was just basically preparing for the interviews. He wasn't up there. I talked to, I think her name was N.U., the nurse that was taking care of Rock. And she was there literally 24/7. And she doesn't recall ever seeing Christian up there. And all the people that came up there were people like Shirley Boone, Pat Boone, the Sweeneys, yourself, people that were close to him, Elizabeth Taylor, all these different individuals. And the people that cared about him genuinely showed up. The people that were either afraid of the disease or afraid of the negative publicity just stayed away. And that was a shame.
Yeah, it was a shame, but at least I understand a little bit of it because Sarah, what was her last name that was writing the book? Davidson, thank you. She had to leave because she had a little boy, and she didn't want the little boy to get this AIDS. And so I understand it, but they were going out. But what really got me was when Tom or Mark, one of them said, they're scared they're going to get it through the phone. Nobody's calling.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Nobody's calling.
Yes.
They're scared they're going to get it through the phone, the telephone. Nobody's calling. So they go downstairs and they make a ring so Rock could hear the phone ring. Yes. Because that was the fear that we were under.
Sarah told me, I spoke with and interviewed her several times, and that's just a single incident. My understanding was that Rock, when he had his coherent moments, would be asking, who's come to visit me? Has anybody sent me a card? And there were none of that. And they felt funny about telling him how alone it was, how alone it was. And that was the prevailing feeling around the estate. Mm-hmm. And so the people that were there who genuinely cared, Tom Clark, George Nader, Mark Miller, Dobbs, the people around him, yourself, were the people that counted. So in that way, he passed a very rich man in that sense.
It seems to me that the most wonderful thing, I just say this is my opinion, which I of course, I appreciate. I'd rather be at home dying in my own bed than any place else, especially with this COVID-19 going on. I want to be home. I want to be home. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because when Rock was admitted to UCLA, he wanted to come home. He didn't want to stay at there. There were a number of attempts by Christian to have somebody come in there and talk to him, and they wanted to find out what was in the will, if he was in the will or not. And Hudson didn't want any part of that. He just wanted to come home and be in his own bed. And he finally convinced the powers that be to do so, and they let him go home.
Yeah.
So in that respect, I think he was very lucky because they could have forced him to say that.
I happen to agree with you. There's 15 more minutes. This is the final bit. We can go on. Okay, fine. Thank you for checking the time there. Thank you, Paul. I think because of all the other cases you've done, and because of who you are in your investigating, because you're an honest investigator. I've often wondered why you haven't been on television, and I'm really pleased that you would allow me to talk to you about these different cases, and that your wife, Sherry, who I adore, trusts me to know that we're going to give the people the truth, but we're going to give them the truth so it doesn't hurt anybody.
Well, I've done this for a lot of years. I've got a lot of interesting stories. I'm working on a book called The Claims Game about the crazy and unusual claimants, the crazy and unusual claims. Truth is always stranger than fiction. And in this case, I think it would make an amusing story to tell. And I'm at the tail end of my career now. And I was going to retire last year, but I mentioned it to my wife, and she asked me what I was wanting to do. And I said, oh, it's going to be great. We'll be together 24/7. So I'm still working. So apparently she doesn't want me to retire yet.
You never get tired of it, do you?
No, I would get retired of being retired.
How is it that you see these things and they're so awful, and you have any faith left in mankind?
I'm a cynic. I'm the most cynical person you're going to ever meet. But I believe that there's good in most people. They do things for varied reasons. Some of them legitimate, some illegitimate, some morally correct, some immoral. But they do it. And that's what makes us different. Mm-hmm. And yet we're all the same. So to me, studying people is interesting. And I enjoy it.
And you don't get, how can I say? I mean, you're talking to me with respect, but it doesn't get to you.
It doesn't what?
It doesn't get to you, the people that lie and cheat and kill?
There are certain cases when I deal with child abductions or anything with child abuse, that gets to my heart. And I've worked on several cases, and one comes to mind offhand where we had a custodial dispute. There was a father that was in jail. The mother wanted the child. The grandmother, the mother of the individual who was in jail, was in Reno, Nevada. And there was a hearing. And they asked me to go up there to observe the hearing and find out what was going on. So I did. And as I was watching the judge contemplating about what's happening, I noticed the grandmother was out in the hallway with the child. And she overheard what the verdict was, and that was to turn over the child to the maternal mother. And she attempted to kill the child. And that's the only time I ever got violent with a woman. And I called in the bailiffs, and they took them away. But I see with child abduction cases, child abuse cases, there is no excuse for it. There's no reason for it.
No.
And there's no justification for it. These people should be locked up for the rest of their lives, period. And the keys thrown away.
But are they?
Are they? No.
No. That's what we're going to talk about. That's one of the things.
Justice is really for those that can afford it.
Okay. That's one of the things that we're going to talk about. We're going to finish Rock Hudson right now. And this is one of the things we're going to talk about next time. Well, we have a couple of things. We have a lot of things to talk about. But the main thing is I thought we'd do missing children or claims that people could get, because I know there's a lot of people hurting for money. And I thought you could explain to them about how they could get it,
Well, I'll give you a current example of that. One of the main claims that are coming in, or a prominent number of claims that are coming in, is called a business interruption claim. And these are policies that restaurant owners generally will take out to guarantee that their income continues during a horrific event such as this virus epidemic. Now, what happens is when the policy conditions are triggered, a certain money is set aside, and in this case, if the restaurant hypothetically is earning $10,000 a week, you cannot submit a claim saying they earned $30,000 a week because of the virus. It's just fraudulent. You're entitled to what you pay for. And I'm getting a lot of those claims in.
I bet you are. I bet you are.
I'm getting a lot of claims where people are making excessive claims for compensation when they're not really injured.
Well, right now, I'm going to go back to, for a moment, Rock Hudson. I'd like for you to tell the audience how the man that was suing him, Mark Christian, for AIDS, that he never got AIDS, one. And two, he died of?
Emphysema. Smoker. He was a smoker. It was interesting because I have interviewed both his doctor, Rock's doctor. I've listened to interviews that he's made afterwards. I've seen the medical records on Christian. He has repetitively been tested for AIDS all along, never had it. Never showed up on any of the tests. And even afterwards, he ends up moving to Woodland Hills and hooks up with another guy. He passes away at a fairly early age, I think it was around 53 years old, of emphysema, smoker's cough. And he never had AIDS. So he was never worried about getting it. He was only worried about how much money he could get off this and whether or not this could make him a star. And I think that ultimately he didn't like the attention because a lot of it started to turn after the trial and they realized what he was.
But you, sir, as a private investigator representing your insurance group, never stopped searching. And it's because of you that he was awarded the $20 million when I was in court, and you, Paul Cohen, turned it around.
I'd like to think I was, but again, different opinions for different people. I can only tell you that when the jury came in, the verdict came in, I interviewed Gunther Frolov. I got a declaration from him. We went to what's called a remittitor, and it gets dropped down to $5 million plus. And then because of the fight that, again, Marvin Michelson had with Rodin, it was reduced even farther. So ultimately, I think Christian may have netted $300,000-$400,000 out of the whole case. And if he would have taken your offer of $50,000 a month for the rest of his life, count that up from the year about 28, 30 years old, guys at 50 years old, $50,000 per month, he would have made a lot more money.
Yes, he would have.
Just would have.
But he wanted the attention in the press, and he wanted to be an actor. So,
yeah, exactly.
But I know there's a lot more about the Rock Hudson case, and we're going to be talking about Casey Kasem next, and then we'll be talking about claims and missing children. So every week you're going to be on, and we're going to be talking about all those files and papers that you have there that you can talk about. And I
got file cabinets full of cases, from the mundane to the unbelievable, literally unbelievable. And
we're going to do.
My fondest cases are interviewing dead men.
Stranger than fiction.
I'm sorry?
Stranger than fiction.
Oh, truth is always stranger than fiction.
So that's what we'll be doing again. This is Paul Cohen, Susan Stafford from Out of the Box, with Paul Cohen talking about the Rock Hudson case. Thank you, Paul. Shalom.
Thank you, Susan. Talk to you later.